Good evening. Good evening. You will be opening your Bibles to Mark chapter 8. I'll do the same. So we can literally all be on the same page, right? Well, we have a few announcements tonight. Now, Aline Randolph is supposed to have a procedure today. We still haven't heard whether she was able or not. Carolyn Rico is doing some better, but she's still having quite a few struggles. Dolores Smith is waiting for some tests to determine what steps need to be taken for her health situation. But for now, for the surgery on her foot, to start with, the surgery on her foot has been postponed. And Robin she's doing okay. We're just waiting to get into next Wednesday. We'll get a CAT scan to find out what's going on with her kidneys, hopefully, and then find out course of treatment from there. So that's how our bodies are doing. But now we can spend the next hour focusing on how our souls are. Amen. Please join me in a word of prayer. Our God and our Father, we are so grateful to you. We thank you for this day. We thank you for the rain that you've sent. We thank you for the opportunity that we have to come together, to spend time in your word. And God, we are so blessed by every opportunity that we take. And God, I pray that we will take every one we can. Father, as we search your word for your wisdom and for your will for our lives, we just pray for your blessing. I pray that you would be with us as we seek to walk in your way. God, help us to always seek the path of truth, to take it to heart, Lord, and to allow you to reign in our lives through. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen. So, Mark chapter 8. We have gone quite a ways, but we haven't gone far either. We're still going to be centered on the Sea of Galilee for this chapter. And so, like I said last week, it's important that we know where, that we know when, that we know that this is historically accurate as well as spiritually relevant. Easy for me to say, right? So, Mark chapter 8, beginning in verse 1, it says, "In those days, when again a great crowd had gathered and they had nothing to eat, he called his disciples to him and said to them, 'I have compassion on the crowd, because they've been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. Some of them have come from far away.' And his disciples answered him, 'How can one feed these people with bread here in this desolate place?' And he asked them, 'How many loaves do you have?' And they said, 7. And he directed the crowd to sit down on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves, and having given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to set before the people, and they set them before the crowd. And they had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said that these also should be set before them. And they ate and were satisfied, and they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. And there were about 4,000 people, and he sent them away. And immediately he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanutha. So, In chapter 6, he fed 5,000. And this time it's 4,000. But there's so much in common with these. We start out with Jesus being moved by compassion. I mean, Mark states it outright, but why else would he be worried about the food that they were going to be eating? So he was moved with compassion. He noticed and took note of the physical ramifications of where they were, what had happened, and what needed to happen. And to me, it highlights the humanity of Jesus. It highlights how he not only knows us and things like, that we're in awe of the way that he knows the number of hair on our head, right? He knows all these things, but he knows that we get hungry. He knows how our physical body works, and he knows it firsthand. He fasted for 40 days. I mean, he knows what it is. And he knows what it is to grow faint. And he knows what it is to live with all of the weaknesses and all of the needs and all of the things that we have in these bodies. He knows those. And not only does he know it, but he was moved by compassion by that knowledge. And it wasn't the first time, it certainly won't be the last, but he was moved by that compassion. He was concerned about their physical well-being. And I'm a preacher, and I'm guilty as anybody in the world of, this is just a shell, I don't care, I'm moving on, I have a view towards something else. But we still live here, and as people, we have physical needs, and he was concerned about that. And yeah, as concerned as he was about them, he's concerned about us too. Matthew 6 lays that out very clearly. He cares for us more than the birds, and they're fed. And he cares for us more than the lilies of the field, and yet they're robed in greater splendor than Solomon. He cares about us, and he will take care of those things. They've been with him for 3 days. They've been with him for 3 days without eating. I've been to those, I know, some of you are my age and older, and y'all know what it is to have those meetings, where it's every night, all week long, and every night you go back. Now you go on, you do your own thing. These people had been with him for 3 days. But they've been with him for 3 days and they hadn't eaten. It's like when they're following him, when they're with him, this is twice now that there's this massive crowd and they're just following him and they're watching him and they're listening to him and they're so just completely taken in all of that their physical needs completely seem to slip their minds. And here they are, 4,000 people in a desolate place, and they've gone 3 days without eating, and there's no food in sight. And according to Jesus, some of them couldn't have made it home. Verse 4, when he mentions this to his disciples said in verse 4, "How can one feed these people with the bread here in this desolate place? There's no bread to buy and no way to buy it, and whatever could we do?" They were there. The men who said this were there last time. I can't imagine what goes through Jesus' mind at this point, but I'll confess right now, I would have immediately said, "Do you not remember just the other day? Do you not remember what happened?" Now, it could have been a month ago, it could have been 2 months ago, but it wasn't that long. And you were there when I used this tiny amount of food. and fed 5,000 people. And now here we are, and I say these people need to be fed, and you're like, I'm sorry, there's no way. No, can't happen. Who could find bread way out here? Well, Jesus asks another, ask a question. He says, how many loaves do you have? What difference does that make? I mean, honestly, what difference does how many loaves do we have? What difference does that make? None, right? Yes.
He asked the same question a few days before, exactly the same question. How many loaves? I'm not sure what the relevance is, but he did ask exactly the same question. And like you said, why didn't they remember?
Yeah. I seem to be being harder on them than he was, but yeah, why didn't
He didn't ask because he didn't know.
it's almost as if they needed a starting place so they could figure out what was going on. Okay, we have 4,000 people. We have 7 loaves. That seems right? But when we look at this, it's just so hard to understand. But he's showing the starting place. He's showing the ridiculous gap between what they had and what they needed. I won't preach those 15 sermons that come to mind every time but there's this huge gap between what they have and what they need, right? And this is a physical manifestation of what God does for us every day. That's what grace is. That's the difference between what we have and what we need. So this is a physical fulfillment of that. And what happens when you gather? What does the Lord's table look like? Well, all my life, I thought it looked a whole lot like that. In fact, almost that same kind of blonde finish on oak almost all the time, right? The Lord's table, when at this point was, y'all sit down. But sit down on the ground. And so he had them sit down at dinner on the ground. And it says that when he takes those 7 loaves, having given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. That's serving, basically. So he gave them the bread to serve the people, to serve the 4,000 people. He gave thanks, and then they served it. And I don't know, verse 7, it says, and they had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said that these also should be set before them. What did he do for the bread? He gave thanks. What did he do for the fish? He blessed them. Interchangeable? Maybe. My dad always said that, some food needs blessing, others you just need to be thankful for. But apparently that's kind of an interchangeable sort of thing here. But anyway, so he gave the disciples these fish, and after he blessed them, that also was served. Verse 8 says, and they ate and were satisfied, and they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. And I mentioned this a few weeks ago when we were in chapter 6. Chapter 6 for the 5,000. When they took up the baskets, there was a word for basket there, and it meant kind of a little satchel size, just a small basket. These 7 baskets that they took up were these big, huge carrying baskets, these massive things. So while there were fewer baskets, there was a lot more leftovers this time. I don't know what the significance is of that, but it was. It was not just a meal. It was not just a provision of just enough. It was enough and then more left over than what they started by a huge magnification. God's provision works that way. I have a friend, actually, we were just in contact today. I hadn't talked to him in a long time. He preaches down in Kermit, Texas. We went to school together. And we were talking, and this was something, he was raised in a church where they believed in things happening miraculously, and a lot of things were accounted to these miraculous feelings and things like this. He was studying with a brother, and he'd been studying with him for a while, and he told him, he said, well, I've studied with you, and I've gone to services there with you and everything else. Now, you need to go down here to Lubbock. And they were out close to Denver City. I'm sorry. Anyway, they went into town and to this big meeting, and there was this big healer who was there, and they showed up, and it was dental night, and they took this man, and they had this camera that they put in, showed in his mouth, and he had this huge, nasty cavity. And the guy was whisked away, and they said they're going to pray for him and pray over him and all this stuff. And he came back just a little while later, and there was a filling. There was a gold filling in that tooth. And the brother who was studying with this man leaned over and said, my God didn't do that. So what do you mean? That's a miracle. You can't say that. How can you even? He said, my God didn't do that. He said, why? What do you mean? He said, when my God heals, it's like new. It doesn't have a patch on. When he healed the leper, he wasn't a little bit better. His skin looked all right. No, it was perfect. When somebody who was lame was made to walk, he didn't kind of stumble around and go through physical therapy and then walk. He jumped up, he picked up his bed, and he took off. That wasn't my God who did that. That's not the way he works. And when God feeds 4,000 people, there's a truckload more left than there was that was even there to start. And that's how God's provision works. And that's, like I said, there's a lot of sermons in there, but I won't preach them all. So verse 9 says that there were 4,000 this time, and he sent them away. And that's interesting too, because they've been following him. They've been right there with him for this whole time. And now he just sends them away. And apparently, when Jesus sends you away, when the Messiah sends you away, you just go. So 4,000 people were dismissed with a full belly and ready for the trip. Verse 10 just says that they departed. They got in the boat again. They've done a lot of boating. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But they've done a lot of boating, and now they went to the district of Dalmanutha. It's another stop on the Sea of Galilee. Let's read verses 11 through 13. It says, the Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, why does this generation seek a sign? Truly, I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. And he got up, or he left them, got into the boat again, and went to the other side. There was a confrontation with Jesus, a confrontation with the Son of God. Matthew and Luke record similar confrontations and a similar call for a sign, and Jesus said that he would only give the sign of Jonah. There are a lot of reasons for that. The timing, 3 days and 3 nights, and the great fish gave up Jonah as the earth would give up Jesus. But here, it's met with a deep sigh. Have you heard those sighs? I cause my mother to do some of those sighs sometimes, and I've heard my wife do them. Usually not me, usually a couple of them. I've heard that sigh, that sigh that's a whole lot more than just kind of catching your breath. It's that, what in the world am I going to do with you? Sigh. And here's Jesus. He's come to seek and save the lost. He's come to serve and not be served, and to give his life as a ransom for many. He's come to be the sacrifice. And here this group who have the opportunity to lead. And they have the opportunity to do good. And yet, they're just strictly hung up on the physical things and they can't get past it. So, Jesus, his works weren't meant to dazzle. They were a sign to confirm that what he was saying was true. And that continued for the first generation of Christians. But it was also about comfort. Have y'all noticed that? What sort of signs could he have done? He could have done anything, right? I mean, what does it look like when 10 legions of angels come down? I don't know, but he could have done that. He could have done these spectacular, awe-inspiring to us things. But the things that he did were almost completely casting out evil spirits, healing people of their infirmities, taking away a fever, causing the dead to rise. These are all things of comfort and things that help people. And he didn't do anything like making the water dance. And honestly, when he was walking on water, which probably would have been one of the flashiest things, it's almost as if he had no intention of being seen. He was just going the same way, and they saw him as he was trying to pass by. So what he was doing was not for their amusement, I guess, is the biggest thing. So he sighed and he left. Verse 13, it says, and they just went to the other side. The Pharisees came. I think that's important. They weren't just there.
Here, before we leave verse 12, or about verse 12, but I wonder, it makes me wonder because it says that no sign shall be given to this generation. And it strikes me as odd because Jesus is fulfilling miracles. Jesus is fulfilling prophecies. Of all the people, right? The Pharisees should see it. So it's almost like those are signs. I mean, sure, they're confirmed, but they are signs of who he is. They demonstrate his power through God, who he is. So I almost wonder whether this is the idea that this generation of Sadducees, the religious sect, the ones who are supposed to know it all, no faith. To them, it's not a sign. They've heard of it, they'll see it, they still don't believe it, and they kill him. So it's like there is no sign. No matter what he does.
Well, and I think you're right, and I think it wouldn't have mattered what he did when they came to him. Because when a group of men get together and say, a noteworthy miracle has taken place of that, there's no way of getting around that. So what are we going to do with these guys? That was later, but it was the same. It was the same bunch. There is no sign that would have gotten through to them. There was certainly a lack of faith, but there was a veil that was there. Yeah, there really was.
What the Jews at the time were looking for an earthquake game, and you wonder if maybe they were expecting someone to come out of heaven, a flaming chariot, wipe out the Romans and establish way that they were expecting something like that.
Well, and it's almost as if he would have given them a sign and established an earthly kingdom, maybe they would have accepted it. But there was nothing that was going to cause them to let go of what they had as far as earthly power for a spiritual kingdom. That they couldn't, like I said, I think maybe it's a veil. Maybe they just couldn't even have wrapped their minds around it, no matter how clearly he stated it. So verse 14 and following. I'm going to be hard on them again. I'm sorry. It says, now, they had forgotten to bring bread. And they had only one loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, watch out. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. No bread. The bread issue. Why is it important that they only had one loaf with them? Well, because it's going to give rise to this misunderstanding. But verses 15 and 16, Jesus is addressing something spiritual and something very serious. And the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod, and from that they got, oh, we forgot to bring bread. Okay. Well, what was the leaven of the Pharisees? It's really interesting because they're very different, what we're talking about here. The leaven of the Pharisees was self-righteousness. The leaven of the Pharisees was a legalistic understanding of God, of his law, and of salvation. The leaven of Herod was, yeah, this Jewish thing is nice, but what's important is the money. Well, you know, he was sort of, kind of, somewhat, I guess, tolerant of Judaism. But when you have these two powers, now they're working in different ways, and they're working from very different directions, but they had the most influence over the people that Jesus would have been teaching, the people that the apostles would later go to. And he's telling them to be careful. Why? Well, do you think he'd heard about Balaam? Think he knew anything about that? The prophet who was swayed by the money. Yeah, he knew that. He knew about that. He knew that physical weakness could bring us to deny things that we shouldn't deny and try to do things that we shouldn't do. And so when we look at that, he's trying to warn them. He's trying to prepare them. You know, that's his whole ministry. He's trying to prepare them. But he's saying, watch out for these evil influences. Why would he put Herod, the influence of Herod and the influence of the Pharisees together? They were not the same. In fact, they have nothing to do with each other. What was the only thing that really joined together the forces of Herod and the forces of the Pharisees?
Likely a dislike of Jesus.
Dislike of Jesus. That is putting it lightly. That's, yeah. They were willing to do anything to stop him. Up to including, and had no problem with killing him. What would join two seemingly just completely opposed powers? Well, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? And so they both wanted to stop Jesus. They both wanted to stop this growing movement that was starting. And so they were willing to work together for that. So he's telling them to watch out for the influence, watch out for the apparent power that they had. Because they would wield what certainly would look like to us in our fleshly eyes, they wielded the power. Jesus is showing over and over again that he was the one with power, right? So that is what he's trying to do, is what he's trying to teach. And they thought that Jesus was worried about the food supply.
Jesus says in another place, a little leaven, a lump. Yeah, a little leaven, a lump. And he's not talking about yeast. He's not talking, he's talking about the effect that they're teaching. In Herod's case, he's worried about Jesus' power as a king. And in the Pharisees' place, they're worried about his power as a teacher. They recognize him as a rabbi. In fact, they have to say, and I don't know if it's always not without sarcasm, but they call him rabbi because he is intelligent in the law. I mean, he understands the law and everything he does.
You couldn't hang around long without figuring out that he's a teacher. Absolutely. So yeah, they were going to have to be careful because these groups were going to do everything they could to stop after the church was established. And so, yeah, they would try everything and anything. You have to wonder why he didn't say, what did I just do? We have a whole loaf for maybe 13 of us. Maybe there's 100 on this boat. I don't know. But what did he just do? They still, they have this problem. In let's see, beginning verse 17 says that Jesus was aware of this. He said to them, "Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened?" That's a tough rebuke. I mean, we may not get that, but that is a tough rebuke. He's saying they have all the provisions that they need. They have eyes with which to see what is happening. They have ears to have heard what he said. And they have minds to remember what he's done. And yet they're using none of it. So it's their lack of understanding, and it comes from a hard heart.
Although they're not Pharisees, maybe at this point in time they have the same veil. You know, they've seen it more than once. They still don't see it. They still don't understand it.
Well, and I think there's a lot to that, because even to the end, they're still looking for a physical kingdom. So I think that you're right. There is something there is some sort of veil that's keeping them from really seeing and really understanding.
Yeah, I have to go back to the generation again, because it ties in. I think it ties into this topic here. In Matthew, he said, "You serpents, you generation of vipers, you were sent prophets and wise men and scribes. Some of them you did kill, crucify, and some of them you scourged in the synagogue." He called this generation, is what I'm getting at. That's who these guys are, is this generation. And so then, in this context, that he's already sent the Pharisees away and said that we're not going to give this generation a sign. And now he tells the disciples that they're thinking about bread, and he says, "Take heed of the leaven, take heed of the leaven of the Pharisees and Herod." He's talking about their ugliness, their ability to sour everything.
Yeah. And we have to be very careful to be not a part of our generation. Because every generation has those issues, don't that generation that Jesus is dealing with, they were so far out from the prophets, they were so far out from so much, and they were so removed spiritually from everything. And he's trying to pull them back. He's trying to make them understand. He's trying to drag them along. But there is a veil. There is something going on where they're not getting it. But they're looking at things by flesh and not faith. They're looking at things in an earthly way instead of a spiritual way. And that's human nature. We still have to watch that. We still have to watch out. It's not the Pharisees and it's not Herod. What is it? Well, it's everything else that's around us. It's all the powers that are in this world that are at war against spiritual things. Verses 19 and 20. It says, when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of pieces did you take up? And they said to him, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? No, I'm sorry, the first one was 12. The second it says 7. So, what point is he making there? Because he doesn't go ahead and say it. So what point is he making there? I'm not worried about bread. Guess what? You shouldn't be worried about the bread. There's something much larger. There's something so much more important than that going on. We had 5 loaves, 5,000 people, and 12 baskets of leftovers. We had 7 loaves and 4,000 people and 7 baskets of leftovers. Why are you worried about bread? Do you ever think that God looks at us and the things that we get caught up in and the things that we concern ourselves with, and I don't mean that we shouldn't concern ourselves with earthly things, because we should be good stewards and we should work and we should earn and we should do those things just as God has commanded. But we seek first His kingdom. We seek first His righteousness. And then we have the promise of all these things being food, clothes, will be added to you. Will be taken care of. But seek first, concern yourself the most with spiritual things. And the earthly things, they'll be taken care of. Verse 21, he said to them, do you not yet understand? He was warning about evil influences. He was warning about things that would be a problem for the kingdom. And it was met with physical concerns. It was met with a concern over how much bread they brought with them. And sitting where we're sitting and knowing what we know, it seems ridiculous, right? It does. That was their concern. That's what they thought Jesus was concerned about. I've had people come to me and talk to me since I've been in ministry and say, you know, Daryl, I have this opportunity and I have this opportunity, and I just don't know what God's will is for my life. And I said, oh, that's easy. Your sanctification. There's only one place in the entire Bible that says, the will of God for you is, and it ends with your sanctification. So that's the easy part. That's what God's will is for your life. Well, which job should I take? Whichever one you can serve Him best on. Whichever one will be the best for your sanctification. What do I need? Which way do I need to go? What car? God isn't concerned with the bread. He's concerned about the threat to the kingdom. We need to be too. Yeah, usually I go over my final point, but sorry, I started preaching. Jesus asked the same question, does the same things, and teaches the same lessons, but they don't get it. He did it twice. Not in a row, but he did it twice, close together. And at the end of that, they still didn't get it. And we could sit here and be, condemn them roundly. Sure. But have you ever done that? I have. I've been taught the same lesson repeatedly. I've stumbled on the same thing, the same stumbling block repeatedly. And there, by the grace of God, for life. God's provisions don't depend on our resources, and praise Him for that. We don't have enough to save ourselves. We are not enough to save ourselves. It's only by His provision. It's by His provision that we have the breath of life within us, that we come and we go. Read Acts 17 sometime. It's only by His provision we have anything in. We don't serve God as though He needs something from us. We serve God because we need to serve Him. Righteousness can unite rival evil influences. If you ever start thinking, man, the whole world is against me, you may be doing something right. When you start getting shot at from all directions, you're probably close to the right place. But we need to watch out. We need to beware. That's what he says. He doesn't just say, oh, you're going to want to pay attention. He says, watch out. Beware of these evil influences. We need to learn the lessons that God provides for us, and we need to remember them. We need to see, we need to hear, and we need to remember. That's what he told his disciples. You have eyes and you don't see, you have ears and you're not hearing. You should be able to remember this, but you're not. So we need to learn the lessons that God teaches us, because Hebrews lets us know that He disciplines those whom He loves. We need to pay attention to that discipline, and we need to learn from it. Otherwise, probably just keep coming. Thank you all.